All right, hey guys, we're back for episode 2 of this mini-series on rubber tracks with Alec Hickox from ZC Rubber. This video is going to be highlighting more on CTL tracks specifically. So when we're speaking about CTL tracks, it's compact track loaders. So the easiest way to think about that is sprocket-driven undercarriages, not the ASV style on that front. And I guess to get started, the construction process for a CTL track, you're probably going to see stuff floating around, continuously steel wound. Alec has a surprisingly interesting history with that and how that all came to place. And there's going to be all sorts of stuff floating around the internet. Natural rubber versus synthetic rubber. Are there blends? What makes certain tracks different in that regard? There's different types of patterns that are more suitable for different type of working conditions. A lot of people call in and ask about, wider tracks giving more traction, when in reality it's generally always is the opposite, reducing ground pressure. And, stuff where normal wear and tear on tracks that may be concerning to you but not a big deal versus guys that are abusing their tracks and causing issues with that. So I guess to get started with the construction process in a CTL track, something big that floats around is continuously steel wound. How did that all come into place with you? And
so, man, you go back, 3 decades ago, basically, when rubber tracks were just beginning to really have a presence here in the U.S., and we started manufacturing tracks. All tracks basically made in a straight line, and their cables would hang out the end of the molds, and then those cables would be overlapped. And you would come in and finish the last section of the molding process. And this was, all on excavator tracks. Track loaders were not very prevalent at all at that point in time. But we were having a very high failure rate on the steel cords being overlapped. They were just peeling apart. And as we started researching this, we started looking into this, we believed that was the weak link in the makeup of a rubber track. So we came up with a way to take the overlap out, and we developed a system for continuously winding the steel cord and having one cord that's wound a specific number of times for whatever size track that we're making. And we believed that by doing that, we would remove that weak link from the track and it would solve all of our problems. It did solve the issue of, the steel cord overlap coming apart. And it did create a stronger track. But what we discovered was the steel cord overlap really wasn't the really big issue. The really big issue was improperly bonding rubber to steel. And so when we went to the continuously wound steel cord, then we fixed that, but then it exposed other issues in the track, and we just started fixing one thing down the line. And as we would fix one thing, it would expose another issue. And by going through that process, we just ended up making a better product in the long run. But the beginning of that was going to a continuously wound steel cord. Now that is the standard, especially with CTL tracks or carrier vehicle tracks. It's as not near a big of an issue with excavator tracks.
Okay.
But CTL tracks, it was the right thing to do.
Gotcha. And then moving into, if you're going around the internet, you're probably seeing stuff about natural rubber, and a lot of guys get stuck in their head immediately that, for blending in synthetic rubber, that must make the track cheaper, it must be junk. But in reality, there's a very specific purpose for that.
There is, and there's a bit of a misnomer out there that 100% natural rubber is the only way to make a track, and that's actually not the case. By using synthetic rubber in the manufacturing process, we're able to bring a certain hardness to the rubber that needs to be there to help prevent cuts, to help prevent certain damages, whereas running 100% natural rubber, that track's going to suffer actually more cuts. And you take a blended track, you take a natural rubber track, 100% natural rubber track, in 6 months, you take a look at those two tracks, the 100% natural rubber track's actually going to show more cuts and abrasion than the synthetic rubber blend is going to show. Speaking to thinking you're getting a lower cost track by having synthetic rubber, that's absolutely not true. Synthetic rubber is every bit as expensive as natural rubber. Even your top manufacturer in the world, which we all have to agree, we have to say is Bridgestone, because they started the industry. They're the leader, so to speak. They're using a blend as well. They're not using 100% natural rubber at all. So by bringing that blend in, we're actually creating a longer wearing product and a product that resists a lot of the cuts that you'll find in a natural 100% natural rubber blend track.
Gotcha. Makes sense. Another, I guess we'll call it a myth that people kind of get stuck in their head is someone will call up and say, I'm running the narrow tracks on my machine right now, and I know my machine can run the wider tracks. I should get better traction out of that. When in reality, you increase your footprint on the ground, you're reducing ground pressure, reducing traction. Correct?
That's exactly right. A lot of people mistake flotation for traction, and actually the narrow track, because it has a higher PSI, pounds per square inch, on the ground, it has the higher traction ability. I like to talk with people when they're doing a lot of site work, they're doing a lot of turf work. You're actually better with the wider track because you're floating over that ground, whereas the narrower track, you're going to get more turf damage. The wider track, you're going to get more flotation. Then it comes down to your tread designs.
Right. Yeah, so perfect. Moving into that, at Skid Heaven, we mainly offer 3 CTL patterns, with your new multi-bar patterns becoming more available and more popular. You have the solid block, the C block, the zigzag, and that multi-bar. It's really application specific what you're trying to do. You see a lot of asphalt guys starting to run track machines now. Running a zigzag pattern is going to be not very cost effective, and probably even you don't need all that extra traction when you're doing that type of stuff. But it's very specific, and generally I tell people on one end of the spectrum we have the solid block for, we'll say, longevity and not as much traction, but zigzag's going to have the most traction generally speaking, but going to burn down faster depending on what you're doing. Would you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, basically your block staggered patterns are really for improved surfaces. Then your multi-bar, if you want to call it that, which when we say multi-bar, what we're really referring to is we're talking about the lug to void ratio. Basically the gap between the tread bar, the valley to the next tread bar. And so it's a low lug to void ratio. And that's going to give you an optimal traction with the least amount of turf damage. That's what you're looking for. What a lot of people call the zigzag, that we developed that tread design 23 and a half years ago, mainly for side slope stability. So when a machine, was on a side slope, that tread pattern keeps that machine from sliding down the slope. That was what it was originally for. It has, over the last 5 years, become the number 2 tread design in the country. And what used to be the block staggered was the number 1 tread design. Now it's the C pattern is number 1. The zigzag pattern is number 2, and the block staggered falls to number 3. Now that multi-bar, especially with some changes to the multi-bar in appearance, is quickly, very rapidly coming up. Caterpillar, it's their preferred tread design on their 249, 259 series. Because landscapers love that tread design because it's doing the least amount of damage on turf.
Yeah, absolutely. Since we're talking about damage, what are your thoughts on normal wear and tear on tracks versus guys that are just abusing the hell out of them, to speak frankly? And
yeah, I mean, I get asked the question a lot, how long are these tracks going to last? I get that question a fair amount. And so my normal response to that is, well, tell me what you're doing with the machine and who's operating the machine.
Yeah.
So we all know rental machines are taking the most abuse because they don't own the machines, and they'll run over anything.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're doing like site demolition, probably don't want to be using a rubber track in that, but people do.
Right.
And they're running over nails, they're running over broken boards and rebar and glass, and I've seen tracks go onto job sites in the last 48 hours. And no fault to the track at all.
Right.
They were just abusing the hell out of the track, if you want to say that. I find that most owner operators by far get the most life out of their track.
Sure.
Because they know the cost of that track's coming out of their pocket, and they're doing everything they can to take care of that track. So they're not running over rebar, they're not hitting curbs and angles, and doing link damage and everything else. So you can see abuse real fast. And I see it every day. And people, they may try to come in to get a warranty on a track, and we have to fully explain. We know exactly what they did. When we see all the pictures and we see the data, we know exactly what happened. And you have to gently let them down. But it's rare that that's owner operators. Owner operators are going, above and beyond to take care of it.
Yeah, definitely. And then kind of the last little thing I wanted to highlight on this video is do get a lot of questions about undercarriage and track tensioning where I see guys their drive sprockets are absolutely worn down into points. That can't be good for a track, right? And other rollers, idlers.
Well, yeah. So I've had this come up. My gosh, in 30 plus years, this has come up a lot. So one of the things is with a worn sprocket, we ship somebody a new track. They get a new track and they call back and the track's popping.
Yeah.
And so my first question is, well, okay, is it popping like every 4 links, or is it popping on one complete rotation of the track? And if it's popping every 4 links, I know I have a pitch measurement issue. I know they have the right track. The very next thing I'm looking at is the sprocket. Mm-hmm. How old is the sprocket? How many hours you got on the sprocket? And then their complaint is, well, my old track was fine. Well, that's because those two wore together.
Right.
Now we're bringing something that's putting the machine back in specs. Mm-hmm. It's important, especially on CTLs. You can pretty much sell a set of sprockets with every set of tracks. That's the smart thing to do, is to put it back into OEM specs. You'll get the maximum life out of your track. But if you have a worn sprocket on a new track, you're actually going to accelerate the wear on the track link, is what's going to happen. So if you put those two back in OEM specs, you're going to get the maximum life out of your track.
Gotcha. Then, what about, the only reason I bring this up is we have a friend right now with a machine. His rear idler looks like a stop sign, like an octagon. It's worn so bad. Is that going to affect...
You said rear idler, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, I had a customer called in, this was several years ago, and he said, hey, I need the lower sprocket. I was like, what are you talking about? And he says, yeah, you got that upper sprocket, is it the lower sprocket? And I said, can you take a picture of that? And his rear idler literally looked like a sprocket. He had worn it was perfect. And I said, you are about 1,000 hours ahead of when that should have been replaced. And basically, when you're wearing things down that far, those track links are going to start getting into the housing of the machine.
Okay.
And you're going to start doing some serious damage to the point of what we call link expulsion, or ripping a link out of a track. When the track had no issue at all, that undercarriage was worn out, and the top of those links start getting into the housing of the roller. It can get into the housing of the machine, and it grabs and just rips them out.
Sure.
And so you go from a $250 idler to a $1,500 track.
Yeah.
It's better just to take care of that undercarriage, update that undercarriage, and save a $1,500 track.
Right.
So
I'd agree. And then the last little thing quickly would be, track tension.
yeah, I have an interesting take on that.
Yeah.
My take, I don't like the tension that the OEM does. I usually think that's a little bit too tight.
Okay.
My rule of thumb is the looser the better, but not so loose you derail it. That can vary depending on the wear of the undercarriage. If you have a brand new undercarriage, you can run that track pretty loose. So if you think of it back when you were a kid and you had a bicycle and the chain would come off your bicycle and you would sit down, put the chain back on, you put your feet on the pedals, you pull that back tire back as tight as you could, you tighten the nuts back up, and you get on the bicycle and you can barely pedal it because you got so much tension on the chain. You're doing the same thing to your undercarriage and your drive motor by over tensioning the track. So the looser you can run that track, the freer the whole undercarriage runs, the more economical the machine's running because it's not taking as much power to make that machine go.
Sure.
So really the rule of thumb, the looser the better, but not so loose you derail it.
Okay. Sounds good to me. I think we'll wrap up this video now and move on to the next one. But yeah, don't forget to like the video, like the page. I'm not good at YouTube, but set up notifications because we'll keep dumping more videos out. And feel free to get in touch if you have any questions.